Warning: adults content. The views expressed by the guest is their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them. Please obtain appropriate medical and legal advice before you take any pharmacological drug or substance for health or other purposes.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Alex Avila with Love University, and we're back. I'm an author, psychologist, and speaker. Every week we talk about how to love ourselves, others, and a higher nature, how to improve our finances, career, health, and spirituality. And today we have a very fascinating guest. This is Dr. Jahan Khamsehzadeh, who is a gentleman who's earned a master's degree in consciousness and transformation from the studies of John F. Kennedy University and his doctorate at California Institute of Integral Studies. He trained with the Mazatec Psilocybin mushroom lineage and conducts retreats on mushroom ceremonies in Jamaica. He's the author of the Psilocybin Connection as well, a book that had just came out. Welcome to the show, Johan.
Thank you very much. Grateful to be here.
I try to pronounce those two names. I try to pronounce your last name.
You did great. You did.
And psilocybin. So this is an interesting thing. The idea that there's this compound, this psychoactive chemical that can actually transform people's lives in many ways. And you've done a lot of research on it. You devoted your life to it. Yeah. I remember one of my favorite movies was Limitless. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
I saw it when it came out.
Guy takes a pill and then it changes his cognitive abilities. They call it nootropics. He makes these amazing connections and he sees things amazingly differently. And then he has success and then he has some challenges. So people have always been fascinated by the idea of there's a pill or substance I can take to transform myself, to have a higher consciousness. Yes. And you tell us that you found this in this called psilocybin, which is found in mushrooms, this compound.
Yes.
And you tell us about your experiences. I guess, was it back in college or something, or you went to see your favorite band and then you took the mushroom and then you changed, something happened. Yeah. You saw everything as love, unity. And you even said this place on earth is actually heaven, is not hell. Correct. As you may have thought. So tell us about your experiences of that.
Yeah, it was about 3 months before I started college. I just graduated high school and I was going to see my favorite band Tool play. And somebody that I had just met that day gave me some mushrooms on the way to the show. I took them at the show and had this experience first of slowly almost dying, which is a very, intense experience. It felt like there was this sensation guiding me forward, but I felt if I was going to keep moving forward, I would dissolve and end up dead. But I was very curious and had been focusing a lot on existential questions for a long time. So I let go and surrendered. And then I had this experience of this deep inner explosion, felt a recognition that I was eternal, meaning there's a part of me that existed before the Big Bang, exists after death. And as I stayed in the state, which was very loving and almost a sense of bliss and a sense of rejoicing, like every cell was feeling a deep sense of love, a voice arose in my consciousness, which is very common with psilocybin in adequate doses. And it felt like, again, immediate recognition this was God. And I was an atheist at the time. And I was suicidal and depressed before this. So this was way outside the bounds of anything I thought possible. And I asked if this is real. The voice said yes, to which I responded by just crying even more deeply. I ended up just tearing for 90 minutes. Wow. And it shared that I asked, what are we? And it said that we are love and light. And I got to visually see this. And it said that this world is in fact like it's heaven. It's only our perception that separates us from this. So there's enough resources and food and experiences available to make this place fairly harmonious. But it's our experience of isolation and separateness. And with those assumptions, the way we treat each other on the planet that keeps us things in this state, but it's inevitable for one day us to grow enough and try to orient this reality and each other very differently. And they said that love's the most important thing on the planet, followed by learning. Everything else is not important compared to those values. Right. And so it was a radical restructuring of my psyche within 90 minutes. And it's continued. It's
pretty amazing.
20 years later.
Yeah, incredible. So Love University, we do believe that love is the fundamental force. Yeah. And of course, university is learning. So I'm kind of curious though, 90 minutes of crying. I mean, were people looking at you? Did you even know people were responding to you or?
Yeah, that's an important thing to bring up in this moment, which is still the most intense, beautiful moment of my life, even this far later. One of the things that was said was caring what other people think is what keeps you separate from God. And so every time I try to get out of the experience because I'm sitting there bawling, looking at the ceiling in this huge filled out auditorium, I would lose connection. And I realized the huge importance, whether it's caring what people think in the moment, in our image, or going to certain careers because it's going to have so much more social benefits and so on, we lose connection with ourselves and our truth.
Right.
and this connection with source. And so that's also played an important role in my life. So I did care, but I also knew that this was a very meaningful experience, and I didn't want to sacrifice it in that moment because I was looking very differently than the way the other people in the stadium were.
Interesting. You come from a background of a lot of transpersonal consciousness, integral studies. You mentioned East and West kind of stuff. So there's a very deep spiritual component to you. And the idea of surrender comes up across in a lot of spiritual paths. You mentioned that you surrender to the experience. But for a lot of people, that's difficult because they want to be in control. Yeah. Not just in use of medications or it could be anything else. So what do you counsel people on that if they want to even try this experience or even other experiences, but they're afraid of losing that control and having the fear that something will happen?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably seen hundreds of people go through these journeys.
Yes.
And not everybody's able to let go, especially on the first go. I think that's a big expectation for anybody. We have these huge patterns and behaviors of living a certain way our entire life. And to ask, hey, be able to drop everything within 2 hours isn't possible. So those expectations are probably one of the hardest parts of doing a lot of this job, because people are almost expecting this huge breakthrough, and it happens almost half the time, which is incredible. But there's another half the time where that doesn't, but people do make significant growth. So even though they're not able to let go that during those 4 or 5 hours that the mushroom's active, they learn so much about their psychology in that struggle and how much control their mind really has. And they make significant improvement by the next time they come in. And their lives get a lot easier because that sense of control actually begins to dissolve. And they're able to be more in flow in their day-to-day sober life.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. Now, Jahan, you say you're part Iranian Persian and part Mexican. And you grew up in a household like that, but you said you were suicidal. Was there abuse or trauma?
Yes, all around. Yes, it was very difficult. I was aware from my parents. Coming into this country, one from Iran, one from Mexico, barely having any English. There's no financial support, no family support. Being illegal for about 10 years each, and so there's a lot of pain, and there were a lot of scarcity and a lot of stress, and that led to a lot of trauma and abuse. And also by the time I was 15, there had been just enough pain and no kind of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
Where suicide was an all day, every day kind of focus for me as a teen. Yeah.
And this transformed you, the experience of the psilocybin?
It did. And I've seen it many people. There was a time where almost a quarter of the people I was working with were suicidal because they've already tried everything. People in their 40s, 50s, 60s, where they're like, I've tried 20 years of therapy. I've tried all the medication. And this was able to decondition their sense of self and the world. And kind of like the same experience I had, kind of like there's finally a light at the end of the tunnel. That light itself is a possible experience you can have.
Wow. So this compound, psychedelic compound found in mushrooms, they call it the magic mushroom. I guess the term magic, right? You think of something supernatural, something amazing. And you said it's been around for thousands of years. In pre-Columbian times, you mentioned the Aztecs who did like ceremonies. You call it the Feast of Revelation, where they would have their enemies that they captured, they would release them and celebrate with mushrooms. Tell us about that. How long has this been going on, this mushroom use?
Yeah,
for
so
purposes?
Yeah, there's a good book recently came out called The Entangled Life by an ethnobotanist, somebody that's focused on studying mushrooms. And he says it looks like psilocybin's at least 67 million years old. I mean, so it predates humanity. We're talking about a fungus that's been here far beyond the emergence of our species. And so much of my book is, let's say, the argument, because it lays out so much evidence in terms of ideas, but also anthropological evidence, that it was probably the main reason for the emergence of humanity itself, that this neurotropic or this compound that we know now increases brain size and hyperconnects the brain, happy to go into those details, was a part of our ancestors' environment in Africa where we evolved. And so that this idea that's happened millions of times over millions of years and gave us the consciousness we now have. So it's historically, and even there's cave paintings of mushroom use going back in Africa, at least to 9,000 BCE. And so there's much to say about the big history, but it's also very widespread here in the Americas. There's over 50 different kinds of psilocybin mushrooms just in Mexico. And so it's a big part of North, Central, and South America's history. And when the Europeans came over, close to the 1500s, the clergy wrote down that the Aztecs had a widespread mushroom use, that even at coronation of Montezuma II, the leader of the Aztec Empire, everybody would be taking mushrooms as part of his ceremony, his political ceremony. The Mayans, who are much older than the Aztecs by a few thousand years, left about 200 different mushroom stones. So this is a deep part of the Americas culture. And the clergy from Europe were, and this is their writing and their letters, put an eradication on the mushroom use. And there was this greatest ethnocide in human history. There's a huge genocide. I mean, 90% of the populace of North, Central, South America were killed. The language changed to Spanish, right? Like we moved into Christianity. So there was immense loss of culture, but it was a deep part of the history of the Americas before the Europeans came over.
Fascinating. And I didn't really know a lot about this until I started looking at your book and looking at these concepts. But the idea that there are therapeutic benefits, I thought very interesting. Research-wise, John Hopkins had done studies on, for example, cancer patients. Up to 80% had diminution of their symptoms of depression and death anxiety. Also, smoking. People that have done this have been able to quit smoking 80% versus 30% normally. And I think they even put it as a possible drug for major depression. FDA is looking into that and other things, PTSD and OCD and all that. So what are the therapeutic applications that you've seen recently?
Everything you've named, I've seen. And I think there's so much more benefits than we can even, those are just the studies we've began to do in the last 20 years. What I can share, from my understanding, it creates a deep sense of wholeness, right? So it helps the whole psyche integrate and come together, and you kind of see yourself and the identity in the world. And so much of the things that you had just named come against from a fractured sense of a self. So depression, what I've come to understand, because about 70% of the people I've worked with come for depression, like major depression, is I don't like myself, right? If you're forced to be somebody you don't want to be, you're inherently in pain.
Yes.
And so this heals that and be like, I am love and I'm deeply connected to everything. And the near of end of life anxiety. So there's been, years of research where people are about to die. They're fatally ill to have 6 months to 2 years to live. Right. Mostly cancer patients. They give them psilocybin and the fear of death goes away. So much of death, the fear also comes from the sense of like, I'm going to be separated from everything I've ever known. And that kind of this deep sense of interconnection heals that. OCD is a deep sense of controlling everything. Addiction is covering deep wounds. And so as the sense of self begins to heal, a lot of these symptoms actually tend to naturally fall away.
Interesting. I think in your experience, you said that you saw us as temporary vehicles going into eternity, and then we're going to get new vehicles. So you saw something that gave you hope that there's something beyond.
Tremendous.
The
I mean,
body.
that was the first major mushroom experience. I've had hundreds of journeys with lots of different compounds, and that theme has come up a lot. For me, death has been a regular theme daily in my mind of just working towards in relationship with this big mystery. But what I've seen in mushrooms, including in other journeys, was that death is the greatest day of our lives. It's this huge embrace and moving back home into this deep unity that we come from. We're interconnected to everything, but we can't pull the plug any quicker than we're supposed to. Right. It's kind of saying like a fuck you or disrespect to the divine, right? Like, so we got to keep unfolding with this play, but we're finally getting to remember everything before we kind of have this amnesia of coming to life. So it's given me tremendous hope and safety and care.
It's fascinating. Yes, some cultures, they say that they mourn when someone is born because their soul is put into a finite body, but then it's released at the end, and the soul can be released. But as you say, you have to actualize your potential here. In Spanish we use the word don, which means don divino, gift from God.
Beautiful.
Whatever talent you have, it could be writing, teaching, or whatever it is, caretaking. But all of us have that, so we need to actualize it for the greater good. Totally. Now the other thing is I thought very interesting is biologically. They say that, we have about 100 billion neurons, but we have so many that we can't really communicate with all of them. So we have this thing called pruning where we focus only on some are more developed. The others are dormant. So apparently this releases serotonin, this compound, which actually activates this communication between more neurons in kind of an open, randomized way. So people come up with new connections and new ideas and things like that. So that was pretty fascinating in terms of the biochemistry. And the other idea was this thing called the default mechanism, where people become very self-focused and self-centered, and this actually lowers that chemically. So you start to look at external things, and one of the things with depression is, as we know, is the poor me, right? Poor me, no one loves me, and all that. And I work a lot with trauma victims and forensic psychology, and oftentimes the idea is that it's an unsafe world, right? Something bad is going to happen. Totally. So this apparently can help maybe change that. And you start to think maybe there is love out there. There's safety, and comfort in the world. So tell us about your therapeutic aspects of that.
Yeah, I mean, everything in alignment we just said. If I'm looking at Maslow's hierarchy, definitely one of my favorite models, at the base needs, we have survival. We have to focus on the physical needs and the sense of safety and belonging before we can really have space for connection. And then after connection, it's self-esteem. I need to feel good enough about myself, and then move into self-actualization, and then I know who I am, and transcendence, self-transcendence, which is like helping and being of service. And so there's certain needs that just become more important than others. And safety, if people don't feel safe, that's the place you got to work from. Everything kind of goes out the window. The entire defense system is structured to help them feel safe. But also the deep sense of not feeling safe also creates a sense of I'm separate from everything. I have to protect myself and so on. And so a deep part of the work is first creating a deep sense of safety. And most of the time they are safe. It's just trauma is almost a deep memory living in the body that they think the past is present here now. Right. So you have to undo that past conditioning, let go of the freed stored energy. So there's a lot of psychosomatic movement in these journeys. There's a lot of shaking and releasing of physical trauma during these sessions. In terms of the default mode network, because it is very interesting what the neuroscience have come to, it is absolutely fascinating, and I think gives a strong grounding for psilocybin and other psychedelics. So as you're alluding to, the default mode network is what the neuroscientists call the ego network within the brain. When you think me, I, a certain network kind of flashes. And it's overdeveloped with people with depression, anxiety, because if you're in pain, you can't help but keep thinking about it. If I don't like myself, you're stuck in this trauma loop of, I don't want to be me, I'm so awful. It's very self-absorbed, right? And it's a bit of a torment. And so that whole network quiets down, and that network tends to act as a repressive function for the rest of the brain connecting. Right. And so if finally when it quiets, that loud voice that they're used to, there's space for all the other voices and all the other parts that come up. And so it creates a hyper connected brain state. I recommend people listening to this just put MRI psilocybin. And so you're just seeing these beautiful images of a brain on psilocybin compared to a placebo. I mean, radically different of how much parts of the brain kind of hyperconnect. And this deep sense of hyperconnection, I think, is a correlation with the sense of unity people feel. As people feeling connected within their brain and all the parts of themselves, they're subjectively having this experience of I'm actually feeling connected to all of nature and everything. So it tends to go together, and that experience again heals the brain. A lot of those pathways stabilize and the brain grows, stimulates neurogenesis, but their sense of the world also tends to evolve with that experience.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Yeah, I'm working on a book, I Love Intelligence, and I give an example of a little kid at a piano, and the kid pounds one key and keeps pounding it, and that's too much noise. And the piano teacher says, there are actually 87 other keys you can play. And for example, psychologically, keys of love or compassion or empathy. But the obsessive compulsive or even the depressive person, they say, no one loves me, no one loves me, no one loves me. Or, it's unhealthy out there, whatever it is. So I guess fundamentally, this may expand your options, right? Your possibilities.
Right. It does. It's deconditioning. Yeah. It breaks out the conditioning.
Different aspects. Now, Jahan, you seem like a very, Jahan, is that the right? Jahan, right?
Sí, qué bueno, sí.
Yes. You seem like a very intelligent guy, and you talk pretty fast, kind of like me. Is that natural, or is it because of the psilocybin?
No, it's natural. Thanks for pointing that. I have ADD, so I've definitely, my mind and my energy moves fairly quick. Right. Even with all the meditation I've done.
Yeah. Well, many geniuses have that, or creative people, they have all these.
It has.
So for you, slowing down, is that your thing that you need to do more? Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, for myself, I actually move at I feel a pretty good speed, but it's normally in connecting with others, with therapeutic work and so on, where they're not moving as fast. Right, because for me, it actually feels really good. So my natural state of being.
You're happy with the speed.
I'm fine. Okay. Thank you.
Now, in terms of the spirituality, this is the other part. So we have the psychological side, the therapeutic, and then the spiritual nature of this experience. Right, you're talking about the psilocybin. You talk about unity, the oneness. We know things like the omega point, unification point, Chardin. Jung's a collective unconscious. Right. The symbols and all. So there's a lot of these interesting things that go on here. Also, Castaneda, you remember some of his work?
Yes.
He talked about transporting your body to different places. I think in one of your podcasts, you talk about even going to outer space or something, or possibly to other universes.
That happens.
Going to history. So all these kind of things are very interesting. So tell us about that, the spiritual side of this use.
Yeah. I think for many people, and including it was for myself, it was hard to believe in something unless I've directly experienced it. And I think there's for good reason, right. I think that's a deep part many of us have. And so this allows access to deep experiential, you could say, realities, and after working the last 20 years in academia and philosophy and so on, I can't tell you where these realities exist ontologically, but when you're there, they feel very real and almost more real than this experience. And they're also very complex and very intelligent. And in this space, it's fairly common that a lot of beings arise, voices, and sometimes you see corporal entities, and they seem very, very intelligent, more intelligent than us. And so we can write this all off. But having myself seen, again, hundreds of people go through this, I've read 75 books just on psychedelics. It's so common, and people tend to get the same messages and see the same beings cross-culturally, regardless of their background. So a very common experience at the beginning of a psilocybin session is seeing geometry. And we've, in this psychedelic culture, tend to call it sacred geometry. And geometry, as many of us know, it helps create the foundation on the architecture of our world, right? Even the idea of Plato's forms and Pythagoras in the beginning, the Greeks had this idea of geometry being very fundamental. And so it's very common at the beginning of the session for about half an hour to just seeing deep geometric shapes all throughout the environment. And for me, that kind of communicates that something intelligent is happening. And then you're generally taken into other worlds. And not everybody breaks in that transpersonal. Transpersonal meaning beyond the personal. For some people, it's completely biographical, and they just see memories and images of their past. Like if they have deep trauma, they go back to their childhood and see the deep trauma. But for some people, it breaks through into something far more expansive, including aliens, spiritual, archetypal, mythical. I think we're all playing with the same reality, whether on psychedelics or not. So we can use terms like Jung's collective unconscious, as you yields Pierre Teilhard's kind of like Omega point, that there's some deep unity, including one that's very mental and spiritual that's holding us together. And it just seems to be in that space, there's a lot of information that we could tap into.
Interesting. I read some research on lucid dreaming where, you can control your dream and you're aware and awake. And one of the phrases they say is, I'm awake, I'm dreaming, I can do anything I want. And the Stanford Sleep Laboratory, people would be, with the monitors, and they would be in the States, and they said they loved it so much they didn't want to wake up from it. Yeah. So I wonder if, first of all, can this help you with lucid dreaming? And number two, what if you love this so much? Do you want to come back to so-called reality? Do you ever say, I just want to be constantly in the mushroom state? Is that possible?
Great questions. I started fairly young at 15, and my dream life is very rich. And I've had so many lucid dreams, and I don't know if that's because of my psychedelic experiences or a natural disposition, or I just tend to care. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually helped support my dream life a lot. In terms of this idea of being stuck or being pulled towards that reality, most people, the metaphor I use is like we're hungry all the time, but once you eat a good big meal, you're no longer hungry. You're not like, I'm already planning the next food. You're satisfied. And then you just eat later when you're hungry. And a deep psychedelic experience is like that, where people can have, and I've seen it many times, the most important experience of their life. And when it's over, they're not yearning for it anymore. There's a deep sense of fulfillment and wholeness to that moment. You're like, yeah, wow, I just connected to God or myself, but I'm very settled. And I see the point of psychedelics, and I think a lot of people that have been in the space for a while would agree. The point of psychedelics is to support and help your daily life. You're there to learn things, to be a better human, and show up best here to realize your potential on a daily basis. And some of us have more pools. I've always wanted to explore that territory, so I might journey more than others. But 2 or 3 times in somebody's life, it can be a transformatively bring them to another level. So once or twice a year is good. A few times in your life is fine. I don't think too many people need to be doing it so much more often than that.
Interesting. Okay. Because we think of like other, substances like cannabis and all that, people use it every day, and some people say it helps them. Some people, they get into it too much. But so you're saying you don't have to use this every day, the mushrooms? So
mushrooms themselves, and it's a very few amount of compounds, are called the tryptamines that include LSD, 5-MeO, DMT, DMT, but psilocybin is the one we're focusing on right now. They all look very structurally the same, work with the same 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. There are one of the most unaddictive compounds that we that we know exists, to the point where you can't really trip 3 or 4 days straight. It just stops working.
Oh,
So if I took a lot of mushrooms one day, I would have to take double the next day, almost quadruple the third. And the fourth day, I could take any amount and it stops working.
So it's a tolerance kind of thing, you're saying?
Yeah, but very, very fast. So you can't keep doing it.
Okay.
But we also see the major studies have been done that it breaks addiction. Right? So use it to overcome. It's been the most effective method for nicotine addiction, for example, 80% success rate also with alcohol. So it tends to break patterns within ourselves, including like OCD. So it's almost anti-addictive and breaks addictions by its very nature.
But I was asking is, if this is such a pleasurable, wonderful state, you can't really continue it all the time, you're saying. I mean, you said once a year, once every 3 years.
So I wish it was that pleasurable. It's very transformative. It could be very, very, very difficult. I can't say that. Very scary, very painful. A lot of every emotion is possible. The goal is more towards wholeness. So anything that's been repressed comes up. It makes you almost more hypersensitive. And for a lot of people, there's a huge breakthrough in this understanding the reality.
Right.
But if you overdo it, it's almost so the Native Americans, and I mean Native Americans across all of the Americas, tend to see these plant substances as teachers. These are spiritual teachers that you're in relationship with. Right. And there's a deep sense of intelligence when you communicate with them, and they'll kick you in the ass if you overdo it. So if you're there and you take 3 mushroom journeys in 1 month.
What do you mean? The Indians kicking the ass, or the
spiritual teachers? The
mushroom.
Internally, the mushroom will make you go through hell for 5 hours.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And like, why are you doing this? You know better. You're running away from your life. So they tend to call out whatever's true. Like you can't lie to yourself when you're on mushrooms. So which is important for developing. But if you're hiding anything from yourself, they will show it to you, even if it means being in a state of agony. Yeah,
because therapy is similar where you get all these painful feelings come out. And it's not necessarily pleasurable, but I mean it can be transformative. And I think you're saying something similar.
Yeah, this brings it all up. Wow. So it's a lot. It's very intense. It's just, it tends to be healthy, but I'm not saying it's pleasurable.
I see. Now, the other thing you talk about in your book, and it's very well written, and you're very comprehensive. You talk about culture and also even economics has or is affected by this. You mentioned inventors, for creativity. Stephen Jobs apparently talked well about it. Global brain. You said blockchain and crypto, maybe even a manifestation of this interconnectedness you're talking about. And the idea that we become integrated superorganisms, or it can be, a global nervous system. Now you're saying this is through the use of psilocybin, or what is your idea?
Yeah. There's so many ways to go. There's one underlying theory that this is how the earth talks to us. There's over 200 different species of psilocybin mushrooms around the planet. And for us, with the kind of perspective we have now in the world, we look at a mushroom as a very small thing, right? But that's the fruit of a larger body. The larger body is called mycelium. It's this huge underground network that interconnects all the plants in the environment. So 90% of plants have a symbiotic relationship with mycelium. 80% of plants would stop existing and mycelium went out of existence, right? So it holds all the intelligence in the environment, moving electrical impulses and information and nutrients to each. It created soil for plants to even evolve. So we're talking about something that's been mycelium about 2 billion years on the planet, right? So we've been living and evolving on top of this network our entire existence. And out of this huge, vast network, which some of them are the biggest organisms on the planet, comes this perfect cap and stem formation, the mushroom, with psilocybin, that hyperconnects our brain, fits into the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor better than serotonin itself with no biotoxicity. You could theoretically take 1,000 mushroom doses. You're going to be physiologically fine. And it creates this hyperconnected brain state that increases intelligence and communication. So one way to see this, that this is almost part of the vast network of the planet itself, because it's evolved on many continents across without it directly spreading. So it's evolved all over the planet for many years.
Are you saying it's like a universal intelligence? Is it a spiritual form?
It seems, I would say a lot of people that have experienced with it over and over would definitely say universal intelligence. But right now I'm just saying planetary intelligence, because I would definitely agree with that first statement. But right now it's kind of creates this hyper intelligent structure on the planet. And there's many plants that out of this connection with mycelium actually have psychedelics.
So you see like a teacher, you said like almost a living being in some ways?
Living being, it talks, it'll have a voice. Again, these aren't things I would believe unless I've experienced it. It's far out there, and yet
it's interesting. I guess animism, like, objects have spiritual or, human qualities.
And so the idea is also, this is where animism grew. The idea, part of the idea is this is the emergence of the original religion. People took these substances in the environment, and we know now, anthropologists would say that shamanism is the oldest form of religion, and shamanism has this animistic perspective that everything is alive and interconnected and is full of spirits.
Right.
And there's plants that actually naturally support that worldview. Right. So, so with this hyper-connected intelligence also is an increase of creativity that can help increase new technologies, so that's happened throughout the last, during the 60s, the computer revolution can be very much put down to the use of LSD.
Right. Exactly.
And so that it can help co-create this planet together, this sense of unity.
One thing, Jahan, if we say that it's a universal intelligence of love, unity, but some might argue, but look at our world today, right? We have war, virus, and we have division, right? People are angry at each other and they're fighting. So is it because there's not enough psilocybin or is not working the right way?
Yeah, I argue we definitely fell out of the pattern of using it. It looks like I would argue a lot of our first ancestors did, and a lot of other people in kind of indigenous tribes had. When we moved into the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago and began growing our own food, we stopped eating things naturally in the environment.
Right.
And so we're talking about millennia generations, we lost touch that there's plants and fungi substances across the planet that really are neurotropics and kind of create this hyper-connected brain state.
Right.
We can see how useful they are for the sciences right now, the last 20 years, but they've always been here. Why haven't we used it? Well, there's been major repression of these substances, whether it's through law or through religion. And this kind of hyper-autonomous view that we have to do everything by ourselves, but we've always been growing out of ecosystems. The environment's always been evolving together. Plants, for example, create your body through turning sunlight into mass and turn into animals and creates our body. It creates your oxygen. The idea is that they also can increase our intelligence. And so because we haven't been using these substances, I think we've been out of balance. Right. But they're very accessible once you become aware of them.
Right. But do you have to use it? Isn't a substance a spiritual love in itself that can create vibrations, or do you actually have to use it for it to happen?
Well, I think we can get there without it. I think there's places that we can't get there without. I mean, I've had clients that they're like, I've been in therapy for 20 years and I couldn't access what I just accessed in one day. And I know that's true for me too, because it creates chemicals in your brain that aren't there otherwise. And that enables it to create new experiences that otherwise aren't there. I've gone through years of meditation, for example, and had some huge breakthroughs. And when I had those breakthroughs, my first thought was, I've experienced this on psilocybin. This just took me like hundreds of hours while psilocybin was fairly immediate. So we are a manifestation of this love, but not everybody's orienting that way. And this can transform those people that are orienting that way, some of them in a day, some of them it takes longer, but it helps create that transformative shift and accelerate it.
Interesting. Now, apparently this is illegal in every state but Oregon for therapeutic purposes.
That's right.
They actually have a therapist that can sit with you for hours and help you through the process. So how do people even do this? In America, you can't really legally do this stuff?
Yeah, that's again part of the sadness of this whole situation. It's a loss that it ever became illegal.
But you go to Jamaica. Jamaica is legal or no?
So Jamaica is the only country where it's 100% legal.
Okay.
We run retreats out there, Ottman retreats. There's other sites also. The Netherlands, I just started working with the company out there. It's a gray zone, but they can give you mushroom truffles. We've decriminalized it here in Oakland, where I live. It looks like California might decriminalize it across the state this coming year.
Okay.
There's other cities that have decriminalized it, meaning you're not going to get punished, but we can't give you this large stamp of approval that you're able to set up and create a licenseship and a training.
I see.
So a lot's shifted in the last 3 or 4 years, and it looks like that's going to continue to shift.
I see. But let's say that you're in Oregon or maybe Jamaica. How do you suggest people use this in those where they can legally do it? For example, I've heard the term microdose. We take a little bit of it. Is that what people do these days? Take a little bit of it?
That's one way. And it's a very safe and easy way to get used to it. So you take one, say, a micro amount. So it's like 0.1 grams of psilocybin mushrooms or 100. Just a very small amount of LSD. And it's a way of getting to know this medicine and having it work with your body. So a lot of people experience more patience, compassion, creativity, openness. There's a book called A Really Good Day, which is a lawyer's account of using LSD microdosing for a month. And she says it was the most productive month of her life, and she was a better mom with her family and so on, a less sense of judgment. So it could be a one way with almost no real loss or cost to really get comfortable with these substances.
Right. But can it help you as much? Because they say in the cancer studies, they actually use a pretty significant dosage. Is the micro too small to make any changes?
it looks like it's really helping people. And I've seen people, as a professional, I can't endorse it, but I've seen that it's helped people get off of SSRIs and antidepressants that tend to just numb the system a lot most of the time, which numbing is sometimes useful if the person's suicidal, but it doesn't cure the underlying condition. And this tends to create a deep sense of wholeness and their okayness with the harder emotions, and looking at it creates more introspection at times.
I see.
So it's helpful in the same way that taking small amounts of any medicine for over a period of time, like SSRIs, could be helpful. I would argue even more, but it's not a substitute for the deep journeys. Exactly. I wouldn't equate them, because the deep journeys are doing this deep dive into the your soul or deep parts of your psyche. Microdosing doesn't take you there.
I see. Now, the other thing, Jahan, you mentioned that you like reintegration sessions where you do a trip or an experience, and then, for each one of those, you have 2 times where you got to, go over, what you learned and things like that. Is that important to do the integration sessions?
If you're doing a deep journey, I'd say essential, including preparation sessions. So I think a fairly good, way of putting it is like 2 prep sessions leading up to a journey, about 50 minutes each, like getting used and creating the intentions, knowing what to work on. This is very clear and intentional. And then at least 2 sessions, maybe the next day or a week out, where you spend time contemplating and thinking about the journey, taking in the lessons. The point is for it to be transformative, and you don't want to just have this big experience to leave it behind. You want to help it become a part of who you are in the moment-to-moment basis. And so I think a specialist is very helpful in that area, but also carving out time for yourself.
Right. Now, how about, there's some caveats I want to discuss with you. You've heard these possibly. Now, you do mention that it's not a substitute for meditation or therapy necessarily. It could be maybe adjunct. And of course, some people may have an adverse reaction. You may be a traumatic flashbacks. They might have delirium, psychosis, they say, possibly hallucinogens, cardiovascular issues. So how do you respond to that? Yeah. And also, are the people who should not use it, for example, should children not use it? Elderly people. Where do you find limits on this?
Yeah. There's so many ways to use it. So a person could experiment by themselves. They can go to a specialist, one-on-one therapy. They can go to a medicine ceremony, more kind of indigenous context, or you can do it recreationally at like a festival, right? So many ways. And it's going to look differently each time. I'll focus on, if you're working with a specialist, for example, there should probably be an intake form, a looking at your medical history, a look of your psychological history to see how stable you are. I wouldn't necessarily, say they guarantee stability. In many ways, they can deconstruct the ego and dissolve oneself, and that can be very destabilizing. So you want to see that the person's pretty grounded.
The other idea, of course, overall, the use of drugs, some people are against it, some people are open to it. Right. But I think you're coming from a place of love where you want to help people, right? You really see this higher purpose in the work you're doing, which I really admire.
Totally. And then, just to finish, because I know it's a big issue in terms of, is there other people that shouldn't? I don't think our current system can hold certain things like, say, borderline disorder or, type schizophrenia. Not that it's someday it wouldn't be helpful for that population. You would just need an entire team available to help people that might have manic episodes or breakdowns. And so this could be helpful for them, but we don't have the infrastructure for that currently.
Right. So this is something in the future. Now, I've never been a real big proponent of using external chemicals to change internal chemicals. Because the idea that this is pretty much a shortcut, right? So people might say, well, I can do meditation. It might take me a lot more time, but it's more of a natural, shall we say, process. So how would you respond to those kind of ideas? Yeah,
I think it's coming from this worldview that we're autonomous. When I mean autonomous, meaning there's a focus on just individuality and we have to do everything ourselves, which is a beautiful and empowering and strengthening perspective. And at some other levels, it's also very depressing and has its kind of downturn effects. Right. It doesn't really take into account our interconnection or interdependence. So right now, you use food to sustain your body. And again, plants for your oxygen and so on. You wouldn't be like, well, no, I'm completely autonomous and separated. I don't need food, right? Your body needs things. It's evolved in an environment. We're saying that this is part of an ecosystem that is very helpful. And it's always been there. Again, in my argument, you can see the book, is that actually catalyzed the emergence of humanity. And so we have a deep interdependence. And I think it's that egoic part of us that says, I have to do everything by myself. And I think we have to humble ourselves to say, no, you can't. We need each other. We need each other as humans to emotionally thrive and do good, to learn. And we also need the plants and fungi in the environment. And so it's letting go of the structure. It's seeing our deep interconnection with everything, that we're all evolving together, that I think really helps bring us forward.
I think one of the fascinating ideas is that these things are living things that have almost a soul or a spirit. And I was assumed that Native Americans have great affection. Would you say that you love the mushroom?
Oh, absolutely. Deeply.
Love is a real love, like a spiritual love.
I'd bow down. Yeah. I mean, it should be placed on the altar. Absolutely.
Okay. So there's something special that you feel about it. Now, in terms of your work, I know you have to travel to do the work, but in Jamaica, where you can do it legally, what actually do you do with people?
So in Jamaica, we do first intake calls, and application forms. I think there's like 200 people waiting on a list, 2,000, wow. Right? 2,000. So there's a lot of people wanting. We take 12 people at a time. And we normally do 2 retreats back to back. So each time I go over there, it's about 24 people. And so there's important to screen people out to make sure they're stable and safe enough and so on. Right. We do an intake call to, again, screen them out personally, aside from just reading. Okay. And we start doing kind of building the relationships. So in the container we're building, it's also influenced by a Western therapeutic model where the relationship between the participant and the guide is also a very big deal. Okay. So we're there to help them focus on their problems, do regular therapy, help them feel comfortable and secure. Same you would as a therapist will with a client. And then once they arrive there, we give them the first day to settle in. They'll normally arrive around 12 to 2 o'clock. We'll have lunch. They're tired. They just travel to a different country. They give them space to settle in. And we're like on the beach, with like an awesome kind of setup where people can like a really, I don't know, what nice tropical zone, and the food's taken care of, nice Jamaican food the entire time.
Is this your company, Jahan?
Yeah, this is Ottman Retreats, and we've rented out a center over there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically people pay, I guess, a fee. They get the airfare. Is it like a package or how? So
the airfare, they take care of. Everything else is done, from transportation to the airport, all the food, the place to stay, all the activities. Right. And once we get there, help them settle down. We'll do an orientation around 6 o'clock, and then a lot of group exercising. A big part of it is having a sense of belonging and safety between the participants. So a lot of connection games help them feel settled down. Okay. Go to sleep the next day, kind of a orientation circle, get them ready for the ceremony. Okay. And the ceremony is 6 to 7, 8 hours. Okay. But time is very different on psilocybin. Sometimes it feels like the whole thing is over and it was only like an hour. But there's times while you're on it, it feels like you're in eternity. So there's a huge time distortion. I see. So even though we're like 6 or 7 hours, sometimes people will do 20 hours worth of work. Right. And then it leaves them and they're like, wow, that was fascinating.
What is it? So is it a pill? Do you eat a plant?
Mushrooms. No, it's mushrooms. So dried mushrooms.
Okay. So you just have a little bit, like a half of it, or do you do the whole mushroom?
We do decent amounts, like therapeutic amounts, about 4 grams, which is what a lot of the clinical studies have been on. And then we supply people with a booster. And we have to assess ahead of time the sensitivity of the individual. Sometimes we give half that amount if somebody feels like they're a very sensitive person or in a very more fragile space, according to age and sense of also gender in terms of how dense they are. Right. And then we have the entire next day for integration. Wow. A lot of extra, a lot of talking as a group and sharing the experiences, a lot of one-to-one check-ins, a lot of kind of journaling and writing, a lot of also downtime where they can relax. And then the second day, we also do some integration before they fly out. And we have a check-in call again once they get back home.
Wow. So very, very fascinating. So you're kind of a counselor. Are you kind of guiding them through the actual experience and after the experience? Or what is your role there?
Definitely. I mean, all the roles. We set up the space, open the container. There's a bit of a ritualistic element, in terms of everybody doing like a meditation and sharing before they kind of take the medicine. And then being very present to what needs to happen or needs to be done during the actual session. Sometimes it could be holding somebody's hand or their feet, if they ask, with consent, of course, absolutely ahead of time. Or writing down what they're needing, or a lot of deep trauma encompasses could be a lot of processing, a lot of the deep needs of being
let's try something here. Jonathan, my friend, could you come over here for a second? I want you to meet Jonathan, a young man that might be open to this experience. I'm not sure. So let's have him sit down here. Jonathan, say hi to our wonderful guest here, Jahan. Jonathan, you're in the music industry. I know you record and produce. I know people use substances, right? Quite a bit. What's your take on what he's saying?
So I know that a lot of people do mind-altering drugs to kind of expand themselves or horizon their perspective. Yes. And especially, with me being like some guy that does music, I see a lot of people do edibles, marijuana mostly, But considering to our conversation, I've never actually seen anyone do shrooms during an actual. I mean, maybe for like the Beatles or something, right?
Okay. All right. So what's your? I know you might come from a conservative background. Some people are religious background. So what's your advice to someone like Jonathan, maybe on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend making music or being actively creative while on the substance. Right. But there had been major studies on creativity, including during the 60s, where they got musicians, architects, scientists, engineers that had been stuck on a problem for about 18 months. That was the requirement to get in. And after the 8-hour LSD journey, 90% of them solved their problem. Right. So there's a huge creative breakthroughs that are possible, but you're fairly incapacitated at a large dose. You're in a very vulnerable space. You need to kind of just lay there. And it's nice to have somebody taking care of you.
Right.
But people can get a lot of insights and breakthroughs while on there that they can carry on the next day. Or
but what I was asking you, Jahan, what about the conflict? Like, let's say he's from a religious background, Catholic, whatever it is, that, that's a sin. I mean, you can't use drugs, that kind of stuff. But part of him maybe wants to experiment. So what's your advice to someone like that?
Yeah.
What do you think about Jonathan?
I mean, I feel like it's important to have your traditional values, but I'm kind of in a mindset where like you should try everything once kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Do things twice. All right. So what would you say, Jonathan, is someone that's conflicted about that, but interested in this experience?
I would first and foremost do a good amount of research and gain more awareness. So there's so much differences between the substances. So I've been talking about psilocybin that's fairly safe. There's other compounds, including what we determined as psychedelics, that not are safe. And for example, psilocybin lasts 5 or 6 hours. LSD lasts like 10 to 12, right? So you need a certain kind of container for these. So aside from research, having a kind of lifeline, like somebody you trust. So I always recommend a professional, but that's not necessarily accessible for most people. So having a friend take care of you for that day would be like the next best thing in terms of having like a low cost option.
Not bad. Right. Are you on the way to Jamaica, Jonathan? You're not sure?
Need to get a plane ticket first.
Okay. You make it sound very interesting. The way you talk about it, very compassionate. And I think the main thing is increasing that level of empathy and compassion. And some people do it through spiritual meditation, through other methods, study, worship, But the idea that you're saying this is almost a shortcut method to get to empathy, right? Empathy and compassion. Yeah. Because empathy, you put yourself in people's shoes, right? You feel as they feel. And compassion, you want to relieve their suffering. So it's really amazing work you're doing. I mean, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. You come from a place of love. Are you on this right now, the psilocybin?
Am I on psilocybin right now? No, that'd be pretty intense. And there's no knees and
microdose, so you can't like a little bit.
It's been a part of my life for 20 years. So it doesn't affect you so many journeys. It's just all the pieces in my life are in place. There's nothing to change right now, so there's no reason to be taking medicine.
Right, but if you're on it, I mean, could you function and talk, or not really? Like if you're on the
plane? Small amounts, I could.
Oh, small amounts.
Yeah.
Well, otherwise, you'd be like in a state where you can't.
Yeah, fairly quickly. And again, that's why it needs to be very intentional and kind of you need to set the space. Like, don't be taking a decent dose and go to work. That's just not appropriate.
You can't do that.
It's normally in a ceremonial container, right? Those are the indigenous traditions where this is planned out and there's a lot of care and intention and respect for yourself and the substance.
I see. So, Jahan, what are you excited about now? Are there any projects coming up? And where can we hear about your work and all that?
Thank you so much. Yeah, the book was about 5 years of work to write this and get it out, but it was about 20 years of research. It's been an interest for a long time. I'm very excited. As you shared, it's the most comprehensive on the idea. Yes. It's available on all platforms. The audiobook should be out at the end of this month. Several projects. We've been creating a project with Silo Health. You can go silohealth.co to create a free 4-hour sitter training because we wanted it to be accessible for other people because normally guides cost a lot. So people can see a 4-hour, at least harm reduction model to hold space for family members, friends, and so on. You
like the term hold space. What do you mean by that?
Somebody's there to kind of take care of you, to listen to you, to witness you, to meet your needs. I mean, so often people move into almost a childlike infantile state where they turn into like silly putty and dissolve, right? So again, they're very vulnerable. So you don't want them to necessarily have to even take care of themselves. There's somebody there to, lack of a better way, babysit you, in terms of like.
So trust is very important. They have to trust you.
Huge. If you're not feeling trust and safety, you're going to close up and can't go deeper. So that's going to be the main element that's important if there's somebody else in the space, how safe and trust is open.
I see. And what's your website?
psychedelicevolution.org.
Okay, excellent.
And the book's name is Psilocybin Connection.
Psilocybin. So you have the book, and you do these retreats in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And, anything else you're working on?
Consult with a lot of organizations. And so pretty full on in this field.
It's been great. I mean, I love that you really want to transform people. And, the idea of unity is a beautiful concept. For sure. Where we can all be united and, have that universal intelligence, through us. And love, like you said, right? Love is the ultimate force.
Yeah.
And Love University, that's what we're talking about.
I love it. And I love that you embrace this and we're open to the idea again, because it's not necessarily part of the conventional norm, even terms within spiritual circles. And so I think it takes a lot to kind of.
Right. There are many paths, but
ideas.
Exactly. Well, in the Hindu religion and other religions, they talk about bhakti, which is the path of compassion, karma, and also the path of duty. So there are different paths, even the path of pleasure some people go through. Right. But then, each path has a certain, journey point. But the key is to be open to the travel, to the journey. Okay. So again, Dr. Alex Avila, Love University. If you want to talk to this, find guests and hear more about it, you can reach us at loveuniversity.love. Write to us at loveuniversitylove@gmail.com. Call us at 310-226-8090. So until next time, this is Dr. Alex Avila. Put away your notebooks, your iPads, your phones, and class is now dismissed. And go out and have a loving week. Until next time.